"I want a child from you," said the Zulu woman to the shy lumberjack. "I want a child from you," she said, and the words landed like an axe head on green wood. Elias Klein stopped with his mittened hands on the sawbuck. The spruce log waited between the iron dogs. He heard the camp before he saw it again. Men laughing in the cookhouse, a kettle singing, the low cough of a winter wind through stacked pine. He did not turn at once. Shyness made him slow and the cold made him stiff. Behind him, Nomusa stood in the snow where the trail met the clearing. Her feet were wrapped and bound, but her dress was her own. Beaded bands shone at her neck and arms, bright against the white. The town called it costume. Elias knew it was a flag she refused to lower. "You should not say things like that," he managed, voice thin in the open air. Nomusa did not move closer. Her breath rose in a steady plume, calm as smoke from a good fire. "Men say things," she replied. "They say them with their hands. They say them and pretend they did not." Elias swallowed. He had a beard he never quite tamed, and red flannel that always smelled of sap and sweat. He looked older than he was, but his eyes still carried the startled look of a man not used to being chosen. "I haven't said anything," he said. "You have," she answered softly. "Every time you look away." The words stung because they were true. He looked away from her because she was the only thing in Birch Hollow that did not fit. Because the men stared at her the way they stared at a fresh cut of meat. Because the preacher's wife had crossed herself when Nomusa walked past. Because Elias feared being the next target of a joke that never ended. But fear did not change what he had done 2 nights ago, when he found her in the shed behind McCready's store, curled in straw like an animal kept from freezing. He had lifted her without thinking. He had carried her to the bunkhouse stove and sat her near the iron, and the men had gone quiet in a way that meant trouble. He had given her his own mug of coffee. He had watched her hands tremble as she drank. He had felt the room watching him and he had hated the room. Now she stood under a low sky and asked for something that could ruin him. "What would you do with such a child?" Elias asked, trying to make it practical. Trying to put boards around a thing that was already alive. Nomusa's eyes stayed on him. Dark, steady, tired in the corners. "I would keep it," she said. "I would not beg again. I would not be moved like a crate." Elias flinched at that. He had seen how the agent spoke to her in town, like she was a problem to be shipped somewhere else. He had heard the word displaced, whispered like it meant contagious. "Where did you come from?" he asked, though he had asked before. She seemed to weigh whether he deserved the answer this time. "From a place that burned," she said. "From men who wore uniforms and smiled while they took. From water that did not carry wood, only bodies." Elias's throat tightened. He knew burning. The camp had lost 2 men last year when the cookhouse chimney caught, and the flames ran the tar paper like oil. But her burning sounded older and wider, like a whole world turned to ash. He scraped ice from the saw's teeth with a thumb and regretted it at once. "I'm not," he began. "You are not like them," she finished for him. "That is why I am here." He stared at the log, at the pale rings that marked years of standing through storms. He thought of time. He thought of how the river took everything sooner or later. "You're asking for marriage," he said, though the word came out wrong. Nomusa tilted her head. "I am asking for life." "That's the same thing here," he muttered. "Here," she echoed, and something sharpened in her tone. "Your here is not the whole earth, Elias." He heard his name on her tongue and felt heat in his ears. He had told it to her once in the shed, when she asked who was lifting her. Her own name she had given like a gift and a warning. "I can't give you what you want," he said too quickly. Nomusa's mouth tightened. "You can. You will not." The wind pressed through the clearing. Somewhere, a branch snapped under weight of snow. The camp felt far away, though it was only yards behind him. Elias forced himself to face her fully. When he did, he saw the bruise at the edge of her jaw, yellowing now. He saw the raw skin at her wrists where rope had been once. He saw that her calm was not softness. It was endurance. "Who did that?" he asked, voice low. Nomusa did not touch the bruise. She did not look down. "A man who said he could help," she said. "A man who wanted payment." Elias's hands curled. The sawbuck creaked under the pressure. "McCready?" he asked. Nomusa's eyes narrowed, not in surprise but in caution. "You know the names." Elias knew the town. He knew who looked at a woman like she was owed. He knew who watched the river barges for new bodies to use. He also knew his own place. A cutter. A driver. A man with no land and no schooling. A man who could be fired with a shrug. "Nomusa," he said, and the sound of it made him feel both brave and foolish. "I'm not the kind of man." She took one step forward. Snow compressed under her foot with a clean crunch. "You are shy," she said, and there was no cruelty in it. "You hide behind work. You hide behind rules. But you watch me as if your ribs would break." Elias breathed out hard, a white plume that vanished. He felt exposed in a way no winter could manage. "I watch because I don't know what to do," he admitted. Nomusa studied him like a blade's edge. "Do you want me?" The question stripped him of every excuse. It was too plain for a town that spoke in sideways words. His throat worked. He could hear his own heartbeat like a hammer striking iron. "Yes," he said, barely audible. Nomusa's eyes softened by a fraction. "Then do not leave me to wolves and call yourself kind." Elias looked past her to the trail, to the trees, to the long line of wilderness that did not care about anyone's rules. He thought of her alone out there. He thought of her in town, every door half closed. He thought of how his mother had died when he was 10, and how his father had looked at him after like he was unfinished work. He thought of children. Not as a sweet idea but as hunger. As noise. As the future pressing its face to the window. "I don't even have a proper house," he said. "You have arms?" Nomusa replied. "You have fire. You have a name they know." His name. A thing he had never valued. A shout rose from the cookhouse. A man called for Elias, impatient, hungry. He should have gone. He should have let this be a conversation that never happened. Instead he said, "If I do this, you'll be tied to me." Nomusa's gaze did not waver. "If I do not, I will be tied to death." The bluntness of it made him dizzy. He opened his mouth and closed it again, a fish on ice. "You're not afraid," he said, half accusation. "I am afraid," she answered. "I am simply done letting fear make decisions." That struck him hardest. Because fear had been making his decisions since he could remember. He stared at her beaded collar, the careful handiwork. He imagined those hands making it by firelight somewhere far from here before the burning place. He imagined those hands now, chapped and cracked from northern cold, still refusing to become someone else. Elias lifted his chin toward the camp. "Come inside," he said. Nomusa did not smile. She only nodded once, like an agreement between equals. Inside, the heat hit them in a wave. Men sprawled on bunks and benches, boots steaming near the stove. Conversation faltered as they noticed her beside Elias. Eyes traveled over her clothes, her beads, her skin, then snapped to Elias like a verdict. Elias felt his cheeks burn. He wanted to turn and run. Instead he reached back without looking and found Nomusa's hand. Her fingers closed around his, firm and warm despite the cold. "What's this, Klein?" a man drawled from the card table. It was Amos Pritchard, thick-shouldered, always grinning like a dog about to bite. "You bringin' curiosities in now?" Elias tightened his grip. "She's my guest." Amos spat into the stovepan. "Guest? Ain't heard of that kind." A low chuckle ran through the room, bitter as cheap whiskey. Nomusa's gaze swept the men. She did not shrink. She did not flinch. Her pride filled the space the way smoke did, claiming it. Elias found his voice by forcing it out. "Any man with a problem can take it to me," he said. Amos's grin widened. "To you? You the preacher now?" Elias stepped forward. The room sharpened. He smelled sweat and damp wool and pine pitch. He felt the old instinct to avoid conflict rise, and he shoved it down like a log into a fire. "No," he said. "I'm the one with an axe." Silence hit heavy. Someone coughed. Someone shifted on a bunk. Amos looked him over, calculating. Elias knew Amos liked easy prey. A shy man became prey by habit. Nomusa's hand remained in Elias's, steady as a promise. Amos finally lifted both palms, mock peace. No harm meant. Just talk. Elias didn't answer. He moved past, guiding Nomusa toward his corner bunk. His blanket lay folded there, rough and clean. A tin cup, a Bible he never read, a small pouch of tobacco. "This is where I sleep," he said, suddenly embarrassed by the smallness of it. Nomusa touched the blanket with 2 fingers. "It is warm." He stared at her profile, the line of her cheek, the bruise fading. The firelight made her beads glow like embers. "You can take my bunk," he said. "I'll sleep near the stove." Nomusa turned slowly. "You think I asked for a child from a man who will not share his bed?" Elias's breath caught. Several men were watching, pretending not to. "I'm trying to be decent," he whispered. Nomusa's voice dropped, only for him. "Decency that leaves me alone is not decency. It is fear wearing a clean shirt." He felt her words settle deep. He had no answer that wouldn't be a lie. From outside, a bell clanged. The foreman's signal. Time for the afternoon cut, Time for the river road, time to work until the sky turned iron. Elias looked toward the door. Duty tugged him like a chain. Nomusa stepped closer until he could smell her hair, smoke and something faint like dried grass. She did not touch him, but the space between them thinned to nothing. Tonight, she said. You will decide if your yes is real. Elias nodded once, the motion stiff. Tonight. He left the bunkhouse with men filing out behind him, their murmurs like insects. The cold slapped his face clean. The sky had lowered, heavy with coming snow. In the woods the work began. Axes bit. Saw teeth screamed. Trees groaned as they surrendered. Elias moved like he always did, steady, practiced, silent. But his mind kept returning to the bunkhouse corner, to Nomusa's unblinking gaze. By late afternoon, they were skidding logs down a narrow run. The team strained, hooves slipping. Elias walked beside the lead, guiding, shouting short commands. Amos Pritchard took the rear, careless, laughing with another man. The sled lurched on ice. A log shifted. Elias saw the angle change, saw the weight turn traitor. Hold, he shouted. Too late. The chain snapped with a whip crack. The log rolled off the sled like a falling wall. Elias lunged, shoving the nearest man aside. The log struck the ground with a thud that shook snow from branches. A scream ripped the air. Amos was down, his leg pinned under the timber. His grin was gone, replaced by a face twisted in pure animal panic. Get it off. Amos shrieked. Get it off me. Men rushed in. Elias jammed his shoulder under the log, muscles screaming. Another man wedged a cant hook. They heaved together. The log lifted enough for Amos's leg to slide free. It came out at a wrong angle, boot filling with blood. Amos sobbed, suddenly small. The foreman swore. We gotta get him back. Elias's hands shook as adrenaline drained. He stared at the blood on snow, bright as berries. He thought of Nomusa's bruise. He thought of rope marks. He thought of how quickly a body became helpless in this country. They fashioned a litter and started the long haul to camp. The wind sharpened. Snow began to fall, slow at first, then thicker. By the time they reached the clearing, the world had blurred white. The bunkhouse light glowed through storm like a lantern at sea. Elias pushed through the door with the others, breath ragged. Men shouted for hot water. Someone ran for the doctor in town. Nomusa stood near the stove, watching the chaos with wide, alert eyes. When she saw Elias, her gaze went straight to his hands. They were smeared with blood. Her face changed. Not fear. Recognition. Elias met her eyes across the room full of noise and pain. He felt something inside him settle into place, heavy and certain. Tonight was coming whether he was ready or not. And the winter outside did not care what kind of man he wished to be. The doctor arrived after dark, blowing in with snow and irritation. He was a thin man with spectacles and a hard mouth. He smelled of camphor. They laid Amos on a table in the cookhouse, under bright lamplight. Men crowded close, hungry for gore and justice. Elias stood back, shoulders tight, blood drying on his knuckles. Nomusa remained near the stove, half in shadow. Her eyes moved from face to face. The doctor cut Amos's boot away with a knife. The leg beneath was swelling fast. Amos whimpered, sweat shining on his brow despite the cold. Hold him, the doctor snapped. Two men pinned Amos's arms. A third braced his shoulders. Amos's gaze found Elias like a rope thrown to a drowning man. You did this, Amos rasped. You pushed me wrong. Elias stared, stunned by the cruelty of it. I shouted hold, Elias said. You didn't listen. Amos's jaw quivered. You wanted it. You wanted me hurt. A murmur ran through the cookhouse, quick as a spark. Men liked a story. A story could replace truth. Elias felt heat rise behind his eyes. He forced it down. The doctor pressed fingers along the shin. Amos screamed, a high sound that made men flinch. Compound fracture, the doctor said. Maybe worse. I'll set it. He'll likely limp. Likely? Amos sobbed. Unless you'd prefer it off, the doctor replied, dry as old bread. Amos turned his head and retched into a bucket. Elias looked away at last. His stomach rolled with the smell of blood and bile. He found Nomusa's gaze again. She watched him as if measuring his spine. Outside the storm thickened. Wind hammered the walls. Snow hissed against the window glass. The foreman, Hal Bruckner, leaned over the doctor's shoulder with a face like carved oak. Can he work? Hal asked. The doctor snorted. Not for months. Hal's eyes narrowed. Then he eats someone else's share. Amos heard that. Terror flashed across his face, sharper than pain. You can't, he pleaded. Hal straightened. We don't carry dead weight. The words chilled the room more than the storm. Men looked down, suddenly interested in their boots. Nomusa shifted near the stove, beads catching lamplight. She spoke without raising her voice. In my country, she said, a man with a broken leg still has a mouth. He still has hands. He still is a man. Several heads turned. They did not like being judged by a woman they had not invited. Hal's eyes flicked to her. And who asked you? Nomusa's chin lifted. No one. That is why I speak. A tense silence fell. Even the doctor paused. Elias felt something dangerous and bright in his chest. He stepped forward, slow, making himself visible. She's right, Elias said. Hal stared at him. What? She's right, Elias repeated, voice firmer. We cut wood. We mend gear. We cook. We drive. We can find something for him. Amos's eyes widened, confused by defense from the man he accused. Hal's mouth twisted. You volunteering your share? Elias's throat tightened. Money was thin. Hunger was real. But he remembered Nomusa's words in the clearing. Wolves and kindness. He nodded once. Yes. Hal watched him a long moment, then spat into the stove pan. Fine, Hal said. 1 month. Then we'll see. The doctor returned to his work, muttering. Men drifted away, the excitement souring into fatigue. Elias stepped back as the doctor began to set the bone. Amos's screams followed him out of the cookhouse like ghosts. In the bunkhouse the air was warmer and darker. Lamps burned low. Men lay in bunks, quiet now, listening to storm. Nomusa sat on Elias's bunk, blanket around her shoulders. She looked small there, yet unbroken. Elias paused at the entrance, suddenly unsure how to cross the room. Nomusa patted the edge beside her. A simple motion. An order almost. He walked over, boots thudding on plank floor. He sat carefully, leaving space. She studied his face, then his hands. You chose, she said. I don't know what I chose, Elias admitted. Nomusa's gaze stayed steady. You chose to be seen. Elias swallowed. He looked at his hands, still stained faintly. He had scrubbed, but blood remembered. I didn't want to fight, he said. You got one anyway, Nomusa replied. A gust slammed the wall. The bunkhouse groaned like a ship. Somewhere, a man coughed in his sleep. Another muttered a prayer. Nomusa drew the blanket tighter. The storm will last. Elias nodded. It'll bury the trail by morning. Nomusa leaned closer, lowering her voice. Then there is no town. No agent. No Macready. Only us. Elias's heart thudded. He smelled smoke and wool and her skin warmed by stove heat. He turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes. The world narrowed to that corner. I'm afraid, he whispered. Nomusa's expression softened again, a thin crack in her armor. So am I, she said. But fear is not a husband. Fear is not a father. Elias exhaled. His breath felt too loud. He reached out slowly, giving her time to refuse. His fingers touched her wrist, careful around the raw marks. Nomusa did not pull away. Instead, she placed her palm over his hand. Her touch was firm, not pleading. It was an agreement. Elias felt his own shyness fight him like an animal in a trap. He leaned in and their foreheads touched, a quiet meeting. Her hair brushed his cheek. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm filled the pauses. Then Nomusa murmured, Do not make me ask again. Elias closed his eyes. You won't. The night moved on, slow and heavy. Lamps dimmed. Men slept. The bunkhouse became a breathing thing. Elias lay beside Nomusa under his blanket. He kept his back stiff at first, as if discipline could save him. Nomusa turned toward him. Her hand found his chest through flannel, feeling the hammering there. Alive? She whispered. Elias's throat tightened. He placed his hand over hers. He felt her steady warmth. He could not undo the world outside. He could not erase the men's eyes. But he could choose what he did with his own body. With his own name. He shifted toward her, the movement cautious and real. Their shoulders touched. Nomusa's breath caught, then eased. She pressed closer, and the blanket rose around them like a tent. Outside, the storm erased tracks. It made the world blank, as if offering a new page. In the hours before dawn, Elias woke to a sound that was not wind. It was a man's whisper, sharp with anger. He opened his eyes to dim lamplight and saw a shape near his bunk. Amos Pritchard stood there, white-faced, sweating. He leaned on a stick, leg bound thickly, jaw clenched. Elias's body tensed. Nomusa slept beside him, eyes closed, breathing slow. Amos stared at the two of them under the blanket. His gaze was a knife. So it's true, Amos hissed. Elias sat up, careful not to jolt Nomusa. "Get out," he said. Amos's lips peeled back. "You think you can buy mercy with a month's share?" Elias swung his feet to the floor, standing. The cold planks bit his soles. "You shouldn't be walking," Elias said, quieter. Amos's eyes glittered. "I can walk enough." He jabbed his stick toward Nomusa. "What is she then? Your little trophy?" Elias felt a heat rise that did not come from the stove. "She's a person," Elias said. "And you're in my space." Amos leaned closer, breath sour with laudanum. "Your space? You got no land, Klein. No house. No family. You got nothing." Elias held his ground. "Then leave me my nothing." Amos's face twisted. He looked like a man staring at his own ending. "I saw her first," Amos whispered. Elias's fists clenched. "You hurt her." Amos's eyes flared. "A man takes what he can. That's how this place works." Behind Elias, Nomusa stirred. Her eyes opened, alert at once. She sat up, blanket around her shoulders. Her gaze went to Amos and stayed there, cold and direct. Amos's stick dipped. For a heartbeat, he looked almost ashamed. Then his pride surged back, uglier than before. "You," Amos said to Nomusa, voice low. "You think you can come here and choose? You think you can breed yourself into our world and call it yours?" Nomusa's face remained calm. But Elias saw her throat tighten. She spoke softly, each word laid like stone. "I think a child is not a rope," she said. "A child is not a bargain. A child is not your property." Amos sneered. "Everything is property here." Elias stepped between them. "Enough." Amos's stick lifted, trembling. "Not to strike. To point blame like a spear. If you make this," Amos spat, "the town will spit you out. They'll call you cursed. They'll call you traitor. They'll call her worse. And they'll call the child a thing that shouldn't exist." Elias's stomach clenched. He heard truth in the threat. He heard Birch Hollow's small cruelty. Nomusa watched Elias's face as if reading his future. Elias breathed once, slow. "Let them," he said. Amos blinked, thrown off balance. Elias's voice steadied. "I'm done living for their mouths." Amos's face contorted. "You don't get to be noble. Not after you crushed my leg." Elias's eyes narrowed. "I saved you from that log killing you." Amos's jaw worked. He had no answer, only rage. He shifted his weight, pain flashing. He hissed, then leaned on the stick harder. "This isn't over," Amos whispered. "I'll make sure she disappears. Like the others." Elias's blood went cold. "What others?" Amos's grin returned, thin and mean. "Ask McCready what he ships downriver." Elias took a step forward and Amos flinched back, fear beneath his bravado. "Get out," Elias said. Amos glared, then turned, hobbling away into the dim aisle. His stick tapped like a metronome of hatred. When he was gone, Elias stood shaking. The bunkhouse seemed suddenly too small, too full of sleeping men who could wake his enemies. Nomusa's voice cut through his thoughts. "Do you believe him?" she asked. Elias swallowed. "I believe he knows something." Nomusa pulled the blanket around herself, shoulders squared. "Then we do not stay," she said. Elias stared. "Where would we go?" Nomusa's eyes held his, unblinking. "Away from men who make women disappear." Elias looked toward the window. Snow crawled across the glass. The storm still owned the world. The camp was all he had ever known. The river road, the cut lines, the routine that kept hunger at bay. But he pictured Nomusa alone in a shed again. He pictured a child growing under the weight of whispered cruelty. He heard Amos's words like a dirty hymn. Elias nodded once, feeling the decision settle, heavy and irreversible. "When the storm breaks," he said, "we leave." The storm did not break quickly. It pressed against the camp like a hand on a throat. Snow piled against doors. Drift swallowed the woodpile. The world outside became a white wall with teeth. By morning, men moved slow and grim, shoveling paths between buildings. Axes stayed hung. Saws stayed idle. A stopped camp meant hungry men, and hungry men looked for someone to blame. Elias kept his head down. He worked the shovel until his shoulders burned. Nomusa stayed inside the bunkhouse, close to the stove. Women were not part of camp life and everyone knew it. Her presence sat in the room like an unanswered question. At breakfast, the cookhouse smelled of beans and salt pork. Men ate fast, eyes darting. Nomusa entered behind Elias, quiet and upright. The room tightened. Hal Bruckner looked up from his plate, chewing. "She staying?" Elias kept his voice level. "For now." Hal wiped his beard with the back of his hand. "Storm clears, she goes." Nomusa sat at the end of the bench, not asking permission. She did not look at Hal. Elias felt eyes on his neck like snowmelt. Amos sat at another table, legs stretched, face pale. His gaze followed Nomusa like a hook. Elias put his tin plate down and ate in silence. Beans tasted like dirt. The coffee scalded his tongue. When the men rose to leave, Amos's voice drifted over. "You leaving with her?" Amos said, not quite a question. Elias paused, hand on the bench. He turned slowly. "Not your business," Elias replied. Amos's smile twitched. "Everything's my business when it's taking my food." Elias's jaw tightened. He made himself breathe. "You're getting my share," he said. 1 month. Amos leaned forward. "And after that?" Elias looked at him, at the bandaged leg, at the fear behind the grin. "After that, you figure your own life out," Elias said. Amos's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just walk away? You think this camp doesn't own you?" Hal's voice cut in sharp. "Enough." Amos leaned back, still smiling. He lifted his cup in mock salute to Elias, then drank. Elias left the cookhouse with Nomusa beside him. Outside, wind slapped their faces. They walked the shoveled path toward the bunkhouse. Snow creaked under boots. Nomusa spoke without looking at him. "He hates you more now." Elias exhaled. "He hated me before. He just didn't admit it." Nomusa's mouth tightened. "He will not stop." Elias nodded. "I know." Inside, the bunkhouse was dim, men away to mend gear and curse the weather. Elias pulled his pack from under the bunk. It was not much. A spare shirt, wool socks, a tin shaving cup, a small knife his father had carried, a pouch of tobacco almost gone. Nomusa watched him pack. Her eyes were calm, but her shoulders held tension. "You have no money?" she asked. Elias glanced at the tin box where he kept his pay. "A little." He opened it. Coins clinked. "Not enough for a long future." Nomusa nodded as if she had expected it. "Then we must be clever." Elias gave a short, humorless laugh. "I've never been clever." Nomusa turned to him. "Yes, you have. You survived this place." Elias looked away. Survival did not feel like skill. It felt like endurance. Nomusa moved to the small window. She peered at the storm, eyes narrowing. "The trail to town is buried," she said. Elias came beside her. Snow blew sideways, thick and relentless. The path vanished beyond the first trees. "We can't leave today," he said. Nomusa's hand rested on the sill. Her fingers were cracked but steady. "Then we leave when we can." Elias nodded. That afternoon, Hal ordered the men to check lines and sleds. "Storm breaks, we haul," he said. "I want the run ready." Elias went with the others to the gear shed. The air smelled of tar and wet leather. Men worked in silence, hammering loose nails, sharpening edges, patching harness. Every sound carried. Amos hobbled in, leaning on his stick, face tight. He shouldn't have been there, but pride kept him moving. He stopped near Elias, watching him oil a chain. "Town's going to love this," Amos murmured. Elias kept working. "Don't start." Amos's eyes flicked toward the door, making sure Hal was not listening. "McCready's got friends, Klein. Important friends." Elias's hands slowed. "What did you mean last night?" Amos's smile thinned. "What I said. Women come through. Then they're gone." Elias's blood chilled. "Gone where?" Amos leaned closer, voice low. "Downriver. On barges. In crates. Paper says, supplies. Paper lies." Elias stared at him, disgust rising. "And you just talk about it?" Amos's face hardened. "I talk about what is. You don't like it, you should have stayed quiet." Elias's grip tightened on the chain. He wanted to swing it at Amos's mouth. He did not. He forced himself to breathe. "Why tell me?" Elias asked. Amos's eyes gleamed. "Because I want to see what you do." Elias stared and suddenly understood. Amos wanted chaos. He wanted Elias to lash out, to lose control, to become the monster they could all punish. Elias's voice went flat. "You're sick." Amos shrugged, a twitch of his shoulder. "I'm honest." Elias resumed oiling the chain, hands steady by force. Amos watched another moment, then hobbled away, stick tapping, satisfied he had planted the thorn. That evening, snow still fell, but the wind eased. The storm's fury softened into steady quiet. The world felt muffled like a thick blanket over sound. Hal announced they'd haul again in 2 days if the trail cleared. Men grumbled, but hope rose with the thought of motion. Elias returned to the bunkhouse with stiff shoulders and a mind that wouldn't settle. Nomusa sat on his bunk, mending a torn seam in her dress with thread she'd bartered from the cook. Her fingers moved quickly, sure. The beadwork caught lampglow. She looked up as he approached. "You are carrying something." Elias sat beside her, rubbing his hands. "Amos says Macready ships women downriver." Nomusa's needle paused. Her face did not change much. Only her eyes hardened. "I have heard men speak of that," she said quietly. "In the town. They say it like a joke." Elias's stomach clenched. "You knew?" Nomusa's gaze went back to the stitch. "I suspected. I did not want to believe." Elias stared at the plank floor. The boards were scarred with boot marks and spilled whiskey. He had always thought of this place as rough but honest. Now it felt rotten under the surface, like a log that looked solid until you split it. "We can't just leave," Elias said. Nomusa's needle pulled thread tight. "We can." Elias shook his head. "Not like this. Not knowing." Nomusa looked at him, measuring again. "What do you want to do?" Elias hesitated. He was not a hero. He was a man who cut trees. But he could not hear Amos's words and pretend he hadn't. "I want to know the truth," he said. "And if it's true, I want it stopped." Nomusa's mouth tightened. "You will fight a river." Elias nodded slowly. "Maybe." Nomusa set the cloth aside. She leaned closer, voice low. "If you do this, they will come for you." Elias met her eyes. "They're coming anyway." Nomusa's gaze softened, just a fraction. "You have changed." Elias gave a short laugh without joy. "I'm just tired." Nomusa reached out and touched his cheek, thumb brushing his beard. The gesture was gentle but not tender in a soft way. It was grounding, like a hand on a shaking shoulder. "Then be tired and still stand," she said. Elias's throat tightened. He nodded. The next day the snowfall eased further. Gray sky remained, but the air was calmer. Men moved outside again, clearing the last drifts and checking the river road. Elias watched for an opening. He needed to go into town, but he could not just vanish without Hal noticing. At midday, Hal assigned a small team to fetch medical supplies for Amos and staples for the cookhouse. Elias stepped forward before his fear could stop him. "I'll go." Hal's eyes narrowed. You? You don't like town." Elias kept his face neutral. "Storms eased. Trails passable. I can make it." Hal grunted. "Bring back quinine and bandages. And nails. God always nails." Elias nodded. "Yes." Hal's gaze flicked past Elias toward the bunkhouse. "And your guest stays here." Elias's jaw tightened. "She comes." Hal's expression hardened. "No." Elias felt the room tilt. Men nearby paused, listening. He forced his voice steady. "She's safer with me." Hal leaned closer, voice low. "She's a problem here, Klein. You keep making problems, I'll cut you loose." Elias swallowed. He could not lose the camp before he had a plan. "Not yet." He nodded once, stiff. "All right. She stays." Hal's eyes stayed hard. "Good. Take Jory with you. And Ben." Elias nodded again. Jory and Ben were older hands, not friends, not enemies. Just men. He returned to the bunkhouse. Nomusa looked up as he entered, reading his face. "You go," she said. Elias nodded. "To town. For supplies." Nomusa's shoulders tightened. Hal said I cannot. Elias's silence answered. Nomusa stood, anger quick but controlled. "So I am kept." Elias's chest tightened. "Just for today. I need." "You need to speak without me hearing?" she cut in. Elias flinched. "No. I need you safe." Nomusa's eyes flashed. "Safe in a room of men who stare at me like hunger?" Elias's voice dropped. "I'll be quick." Nomusa stepped closer. "If you do not return." "I will," Elias said. Nomusa's mouth trembled, not with weakness but with restraint. She drew a slow breath. Then she reached into the folds of her dress and pulled out a small beaded band, worn but bright. She placed it in Elias's palm. "This is mine," she said. "If you are taken, I want something of you returned to me." Elias closed his fingers around it, heart squeezing. "I'm not going to be taken." Nomusa held his gaze. "No man plans to be." Elias nodded, swallowing. "If I don't return by nightfall, you go." Nomusa's eyes narrowed. "Go where?" Elias glanced toward the back of the bunkhouse, where the stacked firewood reached near the wall. "There's a trapdoor in the floor by the stove. Under it is a crawl space. It leads to the supply shed. You hide. You wait until dark. Then you follow the river east. Stay in the trees." Nomusa listened, face hard. "You have thought of this." Elias exhaled. I had to. Nomusa's jaw clenched. I do not like hiding. Elias met her eyes. I don't like leaving you. For a moment they just stood, heat of the stove behind them, cold pressing through the walls. Nomusa lifted her hand and pressed her palm against his chest again. Come back, she said. Elias nodded once. I will. He left with Jory and Ben, 3 men on snowshoes, packs on backs. The trail to town wound through pines heavy with snow. The world was quiet, only their breathing and the crunch of packed snow. Jory talked to fill the silence, complaining about Hal, about the cook's beans, about Amos's mouth. Ben stayed quiet, eyes forward. Elias listened, but his mind ran ahead. Birch Hollow lay 10 miles down the trail, a river town with a sawmill and a church and a store that sold everything from nails to whiskey. It looked harmless from a distance. Up close, it had corners where men spoke low and doors that closed too quick. They reached town near late afternoon. Smoke rose from chimneys. Dogs barked. The river ran dark under ice, moving slow but unstoppable. Elias's stomach tightened as they approached McCready's store. Jory clapped Elias on the shoulder. Get your nails, Klein. Maybe buy yourself a woman while you're at it? He joked and laughed at his own words. Elias forced a thin smile. Just nails. They entered the store. The bell above the door jingled. McCready stood behind the counter, heavy and red-faced, counting coins. Shelves held flour, salt, lamp oil, cloth. McCready looked up and smiled like a man welcoming prey. Camp boys, he said. Storm treat you gentle? Jory chuckled. Gentle enough. Need supplies. McCready nodded, eyes sliding to Elias. And you, Klein. You look pale. Elias's voice stayed even. Bandages. Quinine. Nails. McCready's smile widened. Always nails. As McCready moved to gather items, Elias watched the back of the store. A door there led to the storeroom. Elias had never been beyond it. He remembered Amos's words. Crates. Barges. Wise. Jory leaned on the counter, chatting. Ben examined a jar of molasses. Elias's gaze flicked to a stack of crates near the back wall. They were marked with stenciled letters. He couldn't read all of it, but he saw the word, supplies. McCready returned with bandages and a small bottle of quinine. He set them down with a thud. That'll be, McCready began. A sound came from behind the storeroom door. It was faint. A scrape. Then a muffled cough. Elias's skin prickled. McCready's smile didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Rats? McCready said quickly. Always rats. Elias stared at him. Sounded like a person. McCready's gaze hardened just a fraction. You hearing ghosts now? Jory laughed. Klein's got a soft heart. Elias forced himself to breathe. Can I see? I'll help you trap them. McCready's smile stayed, but it went cold. No need. Elias's pulse thudded. He felt the beaded band in his pocket like a weight. He leaned forward slightly. What are you shipping downriver, McCready? The store seemed to shrink. Jory stopped laughing. Ben looked up. McCready's eyes narrowed. What kind of question is that? Elias kept his voice calm. Just curious. McCready's hand rested on the counter edge, knuckles whitening. Curiosity gets men drowned in this town. Elias stared, refusing to look away. Behind them, the bell over the door jingled again. Another man entered, stamping snow off boots. Elias glanced and his stomach dropped. It was the agent Elias had seen before, the one who spoke to Nomusa like she was freight. He wore a wool coat and a confident smile. His eyes took in the room, then settled on Elias with interest. Well, the agent said, voice smooth, what do we have here? If you enjoyed, please subscribe and comment what country you're watching from. See you in the next one.